My pharmaceutical CEO brother knew his drug was killing patients but hid the data, so I made sure his company flatlined first. I was 28 when I discovered Ethan had become a monster. Growing up, he was my hero. 3 years older, brilliant, destined for greatness. While I struggled through nursing school working double shifts at a greasy diner that smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams, he sailed through Harvard Medical, then Stanford Business School on full scholarships. When he landed the CEO position at Meridian Pharmaceuticals at just 35, I was so proud I cried during his press conference. Finally, someone in our family had made it. Our parents had died in a car crash when I was 19, leaving us with nothing but debt and each other. Dad had been a mechanic, Mom a part-time bookkeeper, hardworking people who never quite got ahead. When they died, we discovered they'd taken out a second mortgage to pay for Ethan's medical school, crushing debt that fell to us. Ethan had taken care of everything, the funeral arrangements, selling our childhood home to pay off their medical bills, making sure I could finish my nursing degree. He'd worked 3 jobs while attending medical school, sending me money for textbooks and ramen noodles. For years, he was the only family I had, the only person who believed in me when I doubted myself. We're going to change the world, he used to tell me during our weekly phone calls. You'll save lives one patient at a time, and I'll save them through breakthrough medicines. We'll honor Mom and Dad's memory by helping people. For 2 years after becoming CEO, I watched him transform. The old Ethan who used to sneak me extra Halloween candy and stay up all night helping me study for anatomy exams was gone, replaced by someone who measured success in stock prices and quarterly reports. His modest apartment became a penthouse overlooking the bay. His Honda became a Tesla, then a Lamborghini. His conversations became rehearsed corporate speak filled with buzzwords about market penetration and shareholder value. His girlfriend changed too. First Jessica, a kind pediatric nurse who volunteered at free clinics. Then Brittany, a pharmaceutical sales rep with designer everything. Finally Cassandra, a supermodel who looked like she'd never experienced a day of physical discomfort in her perfect life. But I told myself that's what success looked like. He'd earned it. He deserved it after everything we'd been through. Then came Veridex. Ethan's miracle arthritis drug hit the market last January, with a marketing blitz that made the Super Bowl look understated. The campaign was everywhere. Billboards showing silver-haired grandparents chasing toddlers through meadows, testimonials from patients finally pain-free after decades of suffering, celebrity endorsements from athletes claiming Veridex had saved their careers. Finally, hope for the 54 million Americans suffering from arthritis. The commercials proclaimed in Ethan's familiar voiceover. The FDA had fast-tracked approval based on Meridian's impressive clinical trial results. Medical journals praised the breakthrough. Stock prices soared 340% in the first quarter. Ethan bought a $12 million mansion in Malibu and started dating Cassandra exclusively. At Ethan's housewarming party, I felt out of place among Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and pharmaceutical executives. Everyone spoke in numbers. Millions of doses, billions in revenue, market dominance projections. When someone asked what I did, and I mentioned I was a nurse, they'd nod politely and drift away to discuss more important things. Ethan gave a speech that night, championing Veridex as his greatest achievement. This drug will touch millions of lives, he said, raising his champagne glass while Cassandra hung on his arm. Finally, we can offer real hope to people who've suffered in silence for too long. The crowd applauded. I felt proud. My big brother was changing the world, just like he'd promised. I was working night shifts at County General when the first case came in. Margaret Chen, 67, had been on Veridex for 6 weeks. Her daughter Rachel brought her to the ER at 2:30 a.m. when she couldn't stop vomiting blood. Margaret was conscious but pale, gripping Rachel's hand with surprising strength while explaining she'd been feeling weak for days. The doctor said some nausea was normal when starting new medications, Margaret whispered, her voice thin and scared. But this morning I started bleeding from my nose, then my gums, then she vomited again, pure blood this time, dark and thick. Rachel was crying, asking if her mother was going to die. I held her hand while Dr. Rodriguez worked, running tests, ordering transfusions, trying everything he could think of. But Margaret's blood wouldn't clot. Every attempt to stop the bleeding failed. Her platelets were normal, her clotting factors functional, but something was preventing her blood from forming stable clots. It's like her blood just forgot how to clot, Dr. Rodriguez told me hours later, staring at Margaret's chart with confusion and frustration. I've been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years and I've never seen anything like it. By morning, Margaret was dead from massive internal bleeding. Her liver had essentially liquefied overnight. Rachel sat beside the bed, holding her mother's cold hand, whispering apologies for not bringing her in sooner. Margaret's death haunted me. I kept thinking about how excited she'd been about Veridex when she first started taking it. Finally, I can play with my granddaughter without pain, she'd told Rachel. Maybe I can even teach her to garden like my mother taught me. Then came David Torres, 52. David was a construction worker, broad-shouldered and tough, with calloused hands that told the story of decades building homes for other people. He had no prior health issues except arthritis in his knees from years of climbing scaffolding and carrying heavy materials. His wife Carmen found him collapsed in their garage at 6 a.m., blood pooling beneath him from internal hemorrhaging that had started sometime during the night. Carmen rode in the ambulance, holding David's hand while he slipped in and out of consciousness. He was fine yesterday, she kept saying. We went dancing for our anniversary. He said the new medicine was working so well his knees felt like they did when we were teenagers. He was fine. Same symptoms as Margaret. Same time frame. 7 weeks on Veridex. Same drug. Same outcome. David died 3 hours later, his organs shutting down one by one as his blood thinned beyond any hope of clotting. Carmen screamed when we told her, a sound that echoed through the hospital corridors and stayed with me for weeks. By the third death, Patricia Williams, 61, a retired elementary school teacher who bled out in her garden while tending to the roses she'd planted for each of her former students. I started keeping a list. I wrote down names, ages, medical histories, timelines. I called other hospitals, talked to nurse friends across the state, asked about unusual bleeding cases. I created a spreadsheet, tracking every detail I could find. The pattern was unmistakable. Every patient had been on Veridex for 8 weeks. Every death involved catastrophic internal bleeding affecting multiple organs, and every case was being written off as coincidence or underlying conditions by the medical examiners. These are statistical anomalies, one doctor told me when I tried to share my findings. Tragic, but unrelated to the medication. Correlation doesn't imply causation, but they weren't anomalies. They were a pattern, a deadly, consistent pattern that someone needed to see. I called Ethan that night, sitting in my car outside the hospital at 3 a.m., exhausted but unable to sleep. You need to investigate Veridex, I told him without preamble. I'm seeing patients die from internal bleeding. All of them were on your drug. His laugh was cold, nothing like the warm chuckle I remembered from our childhood. You're a nurse, not a researcher. Correlation isn't causation. We have teams of scientists monitoring adverse events 24 hours a day. Ethan, I've documented 12 deaths in 6 weeks. Drop it. He cut me off, his voice sharp with irritation. You don't understand the bigger picture. This drug is helping millions of people live pain-free lives for the first time in decades. It's killing people. Every medication has risks. The benefits outweigh bullshit. I'd never sworn at my brother before, but I was too angry to care about politeness. These aren't acceptable risks. These are preventable deaths. Margaret Chen bled out because your drug destroyed her liver. David Torres died in front of his wife because... I don't need a play-by-play of individual cases, Ethan interrupted. Individual anecdotes don't override clinical data. What clinical data? Have you actually looked at the real-world outcomes? The line went quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, harder, more calculating. Stay in your lane, he said slowly. Stick to bedpans and blood pressure checks. Leave the big decisions to people who understand them. Then he did hang up, but I couldn't drop it. Not when Margaret's granddaughter called the hospital the next day, a 7-year-old voice asking the nurse why her grandma had to die and when she was coming back. Not when David's wife Carmen broke down in the hallway, convinced she'd somehow failed him by not recognizing the symptoms sooner. Not when Patricia's son demanded to know why no one had warned them about bleeding risks, why the medication that was supposed to help his mother ended up killing her. I started my own investigation. It began with patient records, every admission to County General in the past 6 months. I spent my off hours in the medical records department, cross-referencing medications with outcomes, looking for patterns the administrators had missed. Then I expanded to other hospitals, calling nurse friends across the state, asking about unusual bleeding cases, building a database of suspicious deaths. The scope was staggering. I found nurses in Sacramento, Los Angeles, San Diego, all reporting similar cases. Patients on Veridex bleeding out from organs that had no reason to fail. Families devastated by sudden, inexplicable deaths. Medical examiners scratching their heads at autopsy results that made no sense. The numbers were horrifying. In California alone, I documented 47 deaths directly linked to Veridex, all involving patients with no prior bleeding disorders, all occurring within 4 to 10 weeks of starting the medication, all being classified as unexplained hemorrhaging or spontaneous bleeding disorders on death certificates. But when I tried to access pharmacy distribution data to get a broader picture of prescriptions versus outcomes, I hit walls everywhere. Corporate lawyers, NDAs, proprietary information excuses. Meridian had locked down everything tighter than Fort Knox, and any physician who asked too many questions about Veridex adverse events received stern letters from legal departments. Dr. Rodriguez tried to help, submitting adverse event reports to the FDA every time we lost a patient, but those reports seemed to disappear into bureaucratic black holes. When he called to follow up, he was told the cases were under review, with no timeline for resolution. It's like they don't want to see the pattern, he told me one night after losing another Veridex patient. Or they're being told not to see it. That's when I remembered Tommy Huang. Tommy had been in my nursing program but dropped out junior year to become a systems administrator after his girlfriend got pregnant and he needed steady income. He now worked for Medilink, the database company that handled prescription tracking for half the pharmaceutical industry. Tommy owed me. I'd covered his shifts for 3 months when his father was dying of lung cancer, giving up sleep and overtime pay so he could spend time at the hospital saying goodbye. I need a favor, I told him over coffee at a 24-hour diner near his office. And it's going to sound crazy. I explained what I'd found, the death patterns, the cover-up attempts, the systematic suppression of adverse event reports. Tommy's face went pale as I talked, his coffee growing cold as he stared at the evidence I'd compiled. Jesus Christ. You're talking about accessing confidential patient data across multiple states. That's federal crime territory, potentially decades in prison. People are dying, Tommy. My brother's company is covering it up, and the FDA isn't doing anything. He stirred his coffee obsessively, the spoon clanking against the mug in nervous rhythm. If I do this, I need plausible deniability. And we burn everything afterward. No traces, no backups, no evidence I was ever involved. Understood. And if we get caught, I don't know you. We never had this conversation. That night, Tommy gave me temporary access to Medilink's prescription database through a backdoor he'd created for system maintenance. What I found made my blood freeze. Veridex had been prescribed to 2.3 million patients nationwide since its launch 10 months earlier. According to the data Tommy pulled, 547,000 of those patients had been hospitalized for bleeding-related complications within 60 days of starting the medication. Of those hospitalizations, 89,000 had resulted in death. 89,000 people dead because of my brother's miracle drug. My brother's miracle drug had a mortality rate of nearly 4%, but somehow none of these deaths were being reported as adverse drug reactions. The death certificates listed everything from gastrointestinal bleeding of unknown origin to spontaneous hemorrhage to complications from underlying arthritis. The connection to Veridex was being systematically obscured through careful coding and deliberate omissions. Even more damning was the geographic pattern. Deaths were highest in areas where Meridian had conducted aggressive marketing campaigns, where doctors had been incentivized to prescribe Veridex through speaker fees and research grants. The company was literally paying physicians to kill their patients. I printed everything and drove straight to Ethan's office the next morning. Meridian Pharmaceuticals occupied a gleaming 40-story tower in downtown San Francisco, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky like a monument to corporate ambition. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with a wall-sized screen cycling through images of happy, healthy people living their best lives thanks to Meridian's innovations. Improving lives through innovation, the company motto read in elegant script beneath a photo of Ethan addressing a medical conference. I made it to the 38th floor before security stopped me. "I'm here to see Ethan Richardson," I told the receptionist, a perfectly groomed woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. "I'm his sister." She made a call, speaking in hushed tones, then looked confused and slightly annoyed. "Mr. Richardson says he doesn't have any meetings scheduled today. Tell him I have information about Veridex that he needs to see immediately. Tell him it's about the bleeding complications." Her perfectly plucked eyebrows rose slightly. She made another call, this one even more hushed, glancing at me nervously. 5 minutes later, Ethan emerged from his corner office. He looked older than his 38 years, stress lines carved around his eyes, his perfect smile strained and artificial. The expensive suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands trembled slightly as he approached. "What are you doing here?" he asked, not moving toward me, not offering the hug or even handshake I might have expected from family. I held up the folder containing Tommy's data. "We need to talk, privately." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes, fear maybe, or guilt. Then the corporate mask slid back into place. "Fine, 5 minutes." He led me into his office, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the bay. Awards and photos lined the walls. Ethan shaking hands with politicians, receiving business accolades, addressing medical conferences. A massive mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface clear except for a laptop and a photo of him with Cassandra on some tropical beach. "You have 2 minutes, he said, not offering me a seat, positioning himself behind his desk like a barrier. I spread Tommy's printouts across his glass desktop. 89,000 deaths, Ethan. 4% mortality rate. Your drug is killing nearly 1 in 20 patients who take it." He barely glanced at the papers, his eyes fixed on my face instead. "Where did you get this?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you know about this and you're doing nothing to stop it. These are preliminary numbers pulled out of context, correlation without proper analysis, confounding variables not accounted for. Stop." I slammed my hand on his desk hard enough to make his coffee mug jump. "Stop with the corporate bullshit. I know you've seen this data. I know you knew about the bleeding risk before Veridex ever hit the market." His face went very still, that careful blank expression I'd seen him use during press conferences when reporters asked difficult questions. "You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. Explain how your clinical trials missed a 4% death rate. Explain why doctors aren't being warned about bleeding complications. Explain why death certificates are being coded to hide the connection to your drug." For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or the ghost of the brother I used to know. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold, executive mask. "The clinical trials were conducted according to FDA protocols. All adverse events were properly reported through appropriate channels." Bullshit. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photo I'd taken of Margaret Chen's death certificate. "This woman died from your drug. Liver failure, catastrophic bleeding, multiple organ shutdown, but her death certificate doesn't mention Veridex anywhere. Why is that?" Ethan's face flushed slightly. "Because medical examiners determine cause of death based on medical evidence, not conspiracy theories from nurses with hero complexes." "Hero complex?" I stood up, leaning across his desk. "I'm trying to save lives. What the hell are you trying to do?" "I'm trying to run a company that employs 12,000 people and provides life-changing medications to millions of patients worldwide. One person's misguided agenda doesn't override the greater good. 89,000 people are dead because of your greater good, and 2.2 million people are living pain-free lives because of it. The math is simple. More people are helped than harmed." I stared at him, trying to find some trace of the brother who used to cry when we found dead birds in our backyard. This wasn't him anymore. This was someone who could calculate human lives like profit margins. "Give me the real clinical trial data," I said. "All of it. The original studies, the safety reports, everything you submitted to the FDA. Get out. Ethan, get out of my office. And if you ever come back here, if you ever contact me again with these baseless accusations, I'll have you arrested for harassment and corporate espionage. People are dying. People die every day. At least with Veridex. Most of them die without the chronic pain that would have made their lives miserable anyway." The callousness of it hit me like a physical blow. I grabbed my papers and headed for the door. "You've changed," I said, turning back one last time. "I've grown up. I suggest you do the same." In the elevator down, watching the floors tick by, I called Dr. Rodriguez. "I need to speak with your research ethics board," I told him. "Tonight. It's urgent." County General's ethics board met in a cramped conference room that smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Dr. Rodriguez had assembled 5 board members on short notice, 2 physicians, a pharmacist, a patient advocate, and a bioethics professor from UCSF. I presented everything methodically. The death patterns I documented personally, the prescription data Tommy had pulled, the statistical analysis showing Veridex's true mortality rate, the systematic suppression of adverse event reports, the geographic clustering of deaths around marketing campaigns. "If this data is accurate," said Dr. Patel, the staff pharmacist, "we're looking at one of the largest pharmaceutical cover-ups in American history. The question is," added Professor Martinez, the bioethics expert, "what can we do about it? This level of corporate malfeasance requires federal investigation, congressional oversight." Dr. Rodriguez nodded grimly. "I'll contact the FDA tomorrow morning, but realistically they'll need months to investigate and Meridian's lawyers will fight every subpoena." "How many more people die while they investigate?" I asked. The room fell silent, everyone staring at the devastating numbers spread across the conference table. "There might be another way," Professor Martinez said slowly. "If this information reached the medical community directly, If physicians knew about the real bleeding risk, they could make informed decisions about prescribing Veridex. You're talking about whistleblowing, Dr. Patel said. I'm talking about saving lives and potentially destroying careers, triggering lawsuits, facing criminal charges for corporate espionage, added Dr. Kim, the patient advocate. How many lives is my career worth? I asked. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret Chen's face, heard David Torres' wife crying in the hallway, imagined 89,000 families receiving phone calls that their loved ones weren't coming home. By morning, I'd made my decision. I contacted Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a medical journalist who'd exposed the opioid crisis 5 years earlier. She'd won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigation into Purdue Pharma's marketing practices, revealing how the company had deliberately addicted millions of Americans to OxyContin. If anyone could handle a story this big, it was her. We met at a coffee shop in Berkeley, far from any Meridian-affiliated facilities. Dr. E.I. Walsh was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes and the kind of intensity that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. This is explosive, she said after reviewing my evidence for 2 hours. But I need independent corroboration, additional sources, internal documents, someone from inside Meridian willing to go on record. I'll go on record. You're not enough. You're the brother's sister. Readers will assume you have an axe to grind. I need someone from inside the company, someone with direct access to the clinical data. That's when I thought of Lucas Peterson. Lucas had been Ethan's roommate at Harvard Medical. They'd stayed close through the years, best man at each other's weddings, godfather to each other's children. When Ethan became CEO, he'd hired Lucas as Meridian's chief medical officer. Lucas was brilliant, ethical, and had always been kind to me during family gatherings. If anyone at Meridian had a conscience, it was him. I found his personal cell number in my old phone and called him that evening. Hey, Lucas, it's Ethan's sister. I need to talk to you about something important. Of course. How are you doing? It's been too long. Not over the phone. Can we meet somewhere private? It's about Meridian. There was a long pause. Is everything okay? No, nothing is okay. We met at a hiking trail in Marin County the next morning. Lucas looked tired, stressed in a way I'd never seen before. He'd always been the calm, steady presence in Ethan's chaotic life, but now he seemed hollow, haunted. You know why I'm here, I said after we'd walked in silence for 10 minutes. He stopped walking, staring out at the bay. Veridex. Ethan won't listen to me, but people are dying, Lucas. Thousands of people. I know. His voice was barely a whisper. God help me, I know. Then why haven't you done anything? I tried. He sat down heavily on a fallen log, head in his hands. I've been fighting this from the inside for months, but no one wants to hear it. What happened during the clinical trials? I presented the real trial data to the board 6 months before launch. The bleeding risk was clear in our phase 2 trials. 23% of participants experienced severe bleeding episodes, 6% life-threatening. I recommended additional safety studies, longer monitoring periods, stricter patient selection criteria. What did Ethan say? He overruled me, said the market couldn't wait, that our competitors were closing in with similar drugs. He had the data reanalyzed, meaning they excluded anyone with bleeding risk factors from the safety analysis. Anyone over 65, anyone with a history of GI problems, anyone on blood thinners. Suddenly, our safety profile looked clean. I objected formally in writing. And Ethan threatened to fire me and destroy my career if I didn't support the FDA submission. He said I was being overly cautious, that I didn't understand the business realities. I felt sick, so you went along with it. I thought I could control the damage from the inside. I pushed for stronger warning labels, mandatory blood monitoring protocols, physician education programs, but Ethan blocked everything, said it would hurt sales and create unnecessary fear. Lucas, people are dying right now, today, while we're sitting here talking. I know. He stood up abruptly, pacing along the trail. Do you think I sleep at night? Do you think I don't see their faces? Every adverse event report that crosses my desk? Every death certificate? Then help me stop it. I have a family, 3 kids in college, a mortgage, aging parents who depend on me. If I blow the whistle on Meridian, I'll never work in pharmaceuticals again. Who's going to hire a CMO who betrayed his company? If you don't, you'll never be able to live with yourself. He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the water where sailboats moved peacefully across the bay. What do you need? The original clinical trial data. All of it. And documentation showing Ethan knew about the bleeding risk from the beginning. That's corporate espionage. If they catch me accessing those files, how many people have to die for your comfort, Lucas? The next day, Lucas texted me an address, a storage unit in Oakland. Inside, I found boxes and boxes of documents, original trial protocols, raw data from every phase of testing, email exchanges between Ethan and the research team, board meeting minutes, safety committee reports. The evidence was damning beyond anything I'd imagined. Ethan hadn't just known about the bleeding risk, he'd actively suppressed it at every level. When researchers raised concerns about high adverse event rates, he reassigned them to different projects. When safety monitors flagged problems during phase 3 trials, he replaced them with consultants who had financial ties to Meridian. When Lucas threatened to resign over the data manipulation, Ethan had offered him a $2 million retention bonus to stay quiet. Even worse were the emails between Ethan and Meridian's marketing team. They'd specifically targeted elderly patients with aggressive advertising, knowing that age was the strongest predictor of fatal bleeding. They'd paid doctors speaking fees to promote Veridex at conferences without disclosing the bleeding risks. They'd ghost-written medical journal articles that minimized safety concerns. I photocopied everything and returned the originals to Lucas the same night. There's something else, he said when I called to confirm I had everything. Ethan's planning to launch Veridex in Europe next month. The regulatory filing there doesn't mention bleeding risks at all. How many more people will that kill? European arthritis market is about 60 million patients. If penetration matches US levels and the mortality rate holds, the math was horrifying. Potentially 400,000 more deaths across Europe. There's more. Lucas continued. They're developing a pediatric formulation, Varidex for kids with juvenile arthritis. My blood ran cold. When? Clinical trials start next year. If the adult version goes to market with this safety profile hidden, I couldn't finish the thought. Children. They were going to test this killer drug on children. I gave everything to Dr. Walsh that night. She spent 3 days verifying sources, contacting independent experts, building an airtight case. She reached out to families of Varidex victims, gathered personal stories, documented the human cost of Meridian's deception. The article broke on a Thursday morning that changed everything. Death by design. How Meridian Pharmaceuticals knowingly released a killer drug ran across the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle, with simultaneous publication in the New England Journal of Medicine and the Washington Post. Dr. Walsh had coordinated the release perfectly. Medical journals for credibility, newspapers for public impact. The story was devastating. Internal emails showed Ethan joking about bleeding heart safety advocates and statistical worrywarts. Board minutes revealed frank discussions about acceptable death rates for profit margins. Most damning was a recorded phone call where Ethan told his head of regulatory affairs, "A few statistical outliers aren't worth delaying a billion-dollar launch." The article included photos of victims. Margaret Chen with her granddaughter, David Torres dancing at his anniversary, Patricia Williams in her garden. Their families had agreed to tell their stories, putting human faces on Meridian's corporate calculations. By noon, Meridian's stock had crashed 78%. By evening, the FDA had issued an emergency recall of Varidex worldwide. By the end of the week, congressional hearings were announced, and attorneys general in 12 states had launched criminal investigations. Ethan called me that night. I almost didn't answer. "You destroyed everything," he said, his voice hollow and broken. 12,000 people just lost their jobs. Billions in investor value. Gone. Pension funds, retirement accounts, all wiped out because of your vendetta. 89,000 people lost their lives. That number is inflated, manipulated. That number is conservative. Your own internal projections estimated 120,000 deaths if Varidex stayed on market for 2 years. Silence on the other end of the line. "I was your brother," he finally said. "You stopped being my brother the day you decided profit was worth more than human life. We could have fixed this internally, addressed the safety issues, modified the dosing protocols. You had 10 months to fix it. Instead, you covered it up and planned to expand internationally. I was trying to balance multiple stakeholder interests. You were trying to maximize profits while minimizing liability. And 89,000 Americans died because of those calculations. I'll never forgive you for this. I'll never forgive you for making it necessary." He hung up. The congressional hearings began 3 weeks later. I testified for 6 hours, walking senators through the evidence step by step, explaining how the cover-up worked, detailing the human cost of Meridian's deception. The hearing room was packed with victims' families, some holding photos of their lost loved ones. These weren't numbers on a spreadsheet, I told the committee. These were people with families, dreams, grandchildren they wanted to see grow up. Margaret Chen was planning her 50th wedding anniversary. David Torres was saving for his daughter's wedding. They trusted Meridian to help them, and that trust killed them. Ethan testified the next day. Watching him on C-SPAN from the hospital break room, I barely recognized him. The confident CEO was gone, replaced by someone who looked broken, defeated. Dark circles under his eyes, hands shaking as he raised them to take the oath. He claimed ignorance of the safety data, blamed rogue employees for suppressing adverse events, insisted he'd acted in good faith throughout the entire process. "I relied on my medical team to provide accurate safety information," he said. "If that information was withheld from me, then I was as much a victim as anyone." Then Senator Williams, the committee chairwoman, asked the question that ended him. "Mr. Richardson, we have a recording of you telling your regulatory affairs director, and I quote, 'A few statistical outliers aren't worth delaying a billion-dollar launch.' Do you remember making that statement?" Ethan's face went white. His lawyers whispered frantically in his ear, but he waved them away. That was taken out of context. What context makes acceptable the deaths of 89,000 Americans? I never said those deaths were acceptable. You called them statistical outliers. I was referring to the safety data, the adverse event reports. The adverse event reports that showed your drug had a 4% mortality rate. That wasn't the final analysis. Mr. Richardson, yes or no? Did you know, before Varidex launched, that it caused fatal bleeding in approximately 4% of patients? The chamber was completely silent. Cameras zoomed in on Ethan's face. He looked at his lawyers, at the committee members, at the gallery filled with victims' families. Finally, he leaned into his microphone. "Yes. And you launched it anyway? We believed the benefits outweighed the risks for the broader patient population. You believed that 89,000 deaths were an acceptable trade-off for higher profits? That's not..." Ethan's voice cracked. "That's not how we saw it. How did you see it?" I thought we could manage the risk through proper medical supervision, by hiding it from doctors and patients, by monitoring outcomes and adjusting protocols as needed. Mr. Richardson, you didn't monitor anything. You suppressed adverse event reports, threatened employees who raised concerns, and blocked safety studies. Isn't that correct? I was trying to balance multiple considerations: patient access to breakthrough therapy, economic realities, competitive pressures. You were trying to maximize profits while minimizing liability. And 89,000 Americans died because of those calculations. Ethan broke down then, on national television, in front of Congress and the world. My brother, the man who'd raised me, who'd been my hero for most of my life, sobbed like a child. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the microphone. "God, I'm so sorry. I never wanted anyone to die. I thought I thought we were helping people. The committee room was silent except for his crying and the soft weeping of victims' families in the gallery. 3 months later, Ethan was indicted on 89,000 counts of negligent homicide, plus charges for conspiracy, fraud, perjury, and racketeering. Meridian Pharmaceuticals filed for bankruptcy within days. The company's remaining assets were liquidated to fund a victim compensation fund that would pay families $50,000 for each death, a fraction of what their loved ones were worth, but something. Lucas Peterson received immunity in exchange for his testimony. He left pharmaceuticals entirely and now works for Doctors Without Borders, developing treatments for neglected tropical diseases. He calls me sometimes, late at night, still struggling with guilt over his role in the cover-up. Dr. Walsh won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative reporting. She's working on a book about the Veridex scandal, with proceeds going to the Victim Compensation Fund. Tommy Huang was never identified as my source. He left Metalink and now works in cybersecurity, helping whistleblowers safely extract and transmit evidence of corporate wrongdoing. I returned to nursing, but I couldn't go back to County General. Too many memories, too many faces of patients I couldn't save in time. Instead, I work for the FDA now, in their Adverse Event Monitoring Division. My job is to catch the next Veridex before it kills anyone. Every day, I review reports of unexpected deaths, unusual complications, patterns that might indicate a hidden danger. The work is harder than hospital nursing in some ways. I see the scope of pharmaceutical companies' willingness to hide dangerous side effects, the sophisticated methods they use to obscure adverse events, the legal and financial pressure that keeps doctors and researchers quiet. But it's also hopeful work. Every dangerous drug we catch early is thousands of lives saved. Ethan's trial starts next month. His lawyers will argue he was just following standard industry practices, that he genuinely believed Veridex would help more people than it harmed. They'll claim he was misled by subordinates, overwhelmed by complex data, pressured by unrealistic investor expectations. The prosecution will argue he knowingly chose profits over human life, that he had every opportunity to do the right thing and chose wealth instead. They'll play the recording of him dismissing patient deaths as statistical outliers. They'll show emails where he celebrated stock price increases while families buried their loved ones. I haven't spoken to him since that last phone call. His lawyers contacted me once, suggesting I testify on his behalf about his character, his childhood kindness, his care for me after our parents died. I declined. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if there was another way. If I could have convinced him to do the right thing without destroying everything he'd built. If our childhood bond meant anything to him at all, underneath the corporate ambition. Then I remember Margaret Chen's granddaughter asking when her grandmother was coming home, David Torres's wife breaking down in the hospital hallway, Patricia Williams's son demanding to know why no one warned them about the risks. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. Some choices reveal who someone really is beneath the surface they present to the world. My brother became a killer, calculating human lives like quarterly earnings, and I made sure justice found him. The only regret I have is that it took 89,000 deaths for me to realize the person I'd looked up to my whole life was already gone, replaced by something that valued stock prices more than human souls.